Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our virtual nature talk about native bees and honeybees. I'm so glad you could join us today. Before we get started with Wendy Leonard, I wanted to tell you about the Phil Hardberger Park Conservancy. The Conservancy is a member-based nonprofit that bridges the gap between San Antonio and nature by bringing free nature programs to the public. They also protect the natural habitat of the park through advocacy, fundraising, and promotion. If you enjoy the programs that we offer in the park, please consider supporting the Conservancy through a donation or by becoming a member. Visit philhardbergerpark.org to learn more. This talk will be recorded and shared on our website. Please turn off your video and mute your microphone. This helps reduce background noise. Okay, Wendy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I don't know if any of y'all know, but my name is Wendy Leonard. I'm a Nature Preserve Officer here at Hardberger Park, as well as some other parks and natural areas in San Antonio. I am a beekeeper on the side. I do beekeeping just for fun. I got into it about 7 years ago, and maybe at the end we'll have a little bit of time to talk about kind of the best ways to get into beekeeping if you think you might be interested. I can kind of share with you my story at the end and see if that's something that you might be interested in as well. So today we're going to talk about a whole range of things with regard to mostly our European honeybee, and then towards the end of the talk we'll go over some of the native pollinators in the insect world as well. So really, why are pollinators and why are bees so important? Well, a third of our food actually comes from pollinators. And there are about 100 plants that bees are actually responsible for pollinating themselves. Things like alfalfa, and as you all know, alfalfa is really important for our food, but then also for food for cows and other livestock. And about 85% of our crops are really pollinated by honeybees as well. So one of the most important things about the European honeybees is that they're a superorganism. So superorganisms, they are amazing because the colony is able to persist beyond the current life cycle. So the current life cycle of most bees, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit, is around 30 days. But the colony is able to persist for years and years and years beyond that because it's kind of a community organization that works to the betterment of the colony. And there are other organisms that do this, like termites. That's another example of these kind of eusocial superorganisms. And they also, characteristics of these superorganisms is that they'll give their life for the betterment of their colony. And as a lot of you know, the honeybees have a barbed stinger, so whenever they sting you, they die. They cannot live beyond that stinging event, whereas wasps and other insects with stingers, they don't have a barbed stinger, so they are able to continue to sting you and then move on and still live. So if you think about it, a bee really doesn't want to sting you because it's going to die, but it does that because it's giving its life for the betterment of the colony. It's protecting the colony. So I want to move into something really important, and that involves the different types of bees. So within the European honeybees, we have two different types. The worker bee, and that's the one that you actually see out foraging. So if you see bees, you're typically going to see the worker bee, and those are all females. About 90% of the hive are these worker bees. Then we have the drones. Those are the male bees, and they really don't forage. Really, they're there just for procreation purposes to create more bees. And then of course we have the queen bee, and the queen bee, we'll touch on this again. I might hit a few points over and over again because I just think it's really important for y'all to have that in your walk away with that in your memory bank. But the queen bee, she can lay up to 2,000 eggs a day. So, and most of those are going to be the worker bee eggs, and then some will be the drone eggs as well. So really important. Here's another look at it where we've got the worker bee, the drone, you see it's a little bit bigger, and then the queen bee, and her abdomen down here is kind of a peanut shaped abdomen. And so really quickly, whenever I talk about the parts of a bee, head, thorax, abdomen. So on the queen bee, we'll take a look at some pictures, but on the queen bee, it's really this elongated peanut shaped abdomen. A lot of beekeepers, and I too still have this issue, is trying to tell the difference between the three types of bees and finding the queen in a hive when you've got all these other bees all over the place. So that's a challenge for beekeepers, especially new beekeepers. So let's get started over here. Trying to find my drone picture. Sorry. We'll come back to that. I have a drone picture where it's easier to see the different types of bees in real, kind of in a real picture setting with other bees. So the honeybees have a really interesting development. They go through the egg right here, and the queen typically, so this is a cell in a beehive, and the queen will typically lay one egg per cell. One way beekeepers can tell if we have a failing queen or if workers are actually laying eggs in a cell is if we have more than one egg per cell. So a healthy hive, a healthy queen is laying one egg per cell. And this is kind of a picture of that. We have, then the next phase is the larval phase. And so these look like little grub worms, really. And then we go to the pupa phase. And so the pupa phase, they're starting to look like, I don't know, like little, they're still looking like grubs, but a little bit more like bees. And then finally they'll pop out of their cell as a honeybee. And they take different times for each caste system. So as mentioned before, there are 3 different types of bees, and those are typically called castes, C-A-S-T-E. And so we have the queen, she's the fastest. She does, from the moment that she is laying, from the moment her eggs are laid, all the way up until she comes out of the cell, out of her queen cell, is 16 days. The worker bee takes a little bit longer at 21 days. And then the drone takes the longest at 24 days. So that's kind of pretty interesting as far as the development world is concerned. They don't all take the same amount of time. And again, the queens are the fastest. We'll talk a little bit more about what happens when in the formation of a queen cell. Let's move over to the beehive over here. So beekeepers tend to have, we all kind of have the same setup where we have a beehive, and we'll look at some of these frames that actually have bees on them here in a second. But I removed the cover. This is the inner cover. This is a handy contraption that beekeepers use, and we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about honey extraction. But these are the frames typically that we have bees on. And I just wanted to go through some of these because they're really great depictions of what kind of some of the great points that are really interesting in the bee world. So honeybees construct horizontal parallel combs well, just parallel combs. And this helps them with thermal regulation. And one of my favorite things is to sit and watch bees fanning their hive with their wings. Somewhere we have a video on this. I don't know if it's still on the website, but it is so much fun to watch the bees actually fanning the entrance of their hive. And so inside their hive, their honeycomb is set up almost perfectly, so that way they can continue to fan throughout the hive and keep it at their optimal temperature. And this really looks at the cells, and each cell is designed in this hexagonal shape. And this is where each cell, there's an egg laid, or they store honey in these cells, or they'll store pollen, and each cell is pretty much used, and they're made out of wax. Now, we went over this before, but I just want to drive home, these points. This is a little bit better depiction of the different types of development. So we've got the egg here, got the larval form here, got the pupa form here, and it's starting to look more and more like a bee. And then you see, it's hard to tell here, but we go through an uncapped section, and then the cells get capped. And by the time the developed honeybee has to work her way out of the cell, she'll actually have to use her mouth parts, her mandibles, to cut through the wax and emerge. And there are bees, and we'll talk about that next, who have different jobs. So when this bee is coming out of her cell, his or her, but mostly hers, she will get fed by nurse bees. And so the first job of newbies is to actually be a nurse bee, to help with the babies that are coming out, with the brood that are coming out of the cell, and to help keep things clean. And they're really important. Then we also have, as mentioned before, the ventilators. That's a little bit further in the development phase. But after the nurse bees, we have something called the kind of the housekeeper bees. So the housekeeper bees, they go around and pull, just kind of what the name means. They kind of pull all the debris, everything out. They take it to where it can be processed and taken out of the actual hive. And so bees, when they start their life off, they actually start off in the hive. And as time progresses, they work their way out to the entrance, which is right here. And so if this hive were to be in a tree cavity, they would work their way out to the tree cavity. So the bees that you see that are close to the hive entrance, or that are out actually foraging, those are the older bees. So younger bees stay in the hive, and as they grow older, they actually work their way out of the hive, out of their home, and go do kind of more outside responsibilities. So one of those outside responsibilities is ventilation. And like I mentioned before, I could just sit all day and watch the bees at the hive. And what these ventilators will do, every bee has a specific job, and it depends on their age. It's called age polytheism. And so their age actually determines their job. And as they get older, the bees will work their way out to the entrance, and they will just stand here on a hot day and just ventilate the hive. They'll flap their wings, they just sit there and flap them as long as they can to kind of get to kind of help with thermal regulation inside the hive. And then there are also ventilators inside the hive that kind of help with that as well. This, as mentioned before, it helps with thermal regulation, but when we talk about honey, the actual honey has to be a certain percentage of moisture that's evaporated off of the nectar that's stored in the cells to make it honey, and to make it honey that's usable. And so we'll talk about that towards the end of the program when we talk about honey. So the other function, I call them the Grim Reapers, but they are tasked with taking out dead bees that are found in the hive, taking them outside of the hive, because the honeybees are really good about keeping a very clean house. So all the debris that is not needed, they'll try and take that out. They will also take out any dead bees. Bees are kind of constantly dying and renewing, so they take out some of the dead bees, or all the dead bees that they can. And so those are kind of the Grim Reapers. Now the oldest bee are the ones that are foraging, and those are the ones that are 30 days or older. And so these are the ones, they're all female bees, so they're all worker bees, and these are the ones that you're going to see on flowers. These are the ones that will likely be stinging you. We didn't talk about guard bees, but I'll do that here in a second. So these foragers are actually the oldest bees. They go out, they forage for nectar, they forage for pollen, they forage for water, and they also collect substances that they make into propolis. And so we'll talk about that when we talk about honey and all the products that the bees make. So they bring in water. The honeybee can bring in, I think it's up to a third of her weight in honey. I've heard a third to a half of her weight in actual nectar. So they bring in a ton of food for the hive, as well as water. And then this one is just a young bee. After she emerges, the pigment is a little off, and so after she has her first meal and protein, she'll start to collect her pigment. But then also, she, as mentioned before, after she is born, she cleans the cells for the eggs to be laid by the queen. And near the 6th day of the young bee's life, she becomes a nurse bee, produces royal jelly, maintains the brood at a consistent temperature by visiting the cells. So these young bees are very important for, as well as all the other bees, are very important for the hive. But everybody has a job based on their age. And this is the picture I was looking for before. There's a couple really good pictures of the drones. So the drones, remember, they are the male bees. And a certain percentage, a very low percentage of the hive are actually drones. Most of what the queen produces are worker bees. And that's in a good, healthy hive. And so kind of the biggest thing that you can see from this picture is the difference between eyes. The one on the left, huge eyes, and the one on the right, the eyes aren't as big. So this one's the drone, and as we looked before, the drone is going to be bigger. We'll look at its abdomen here in a little bit, but the drone's going to be bigger, but it's also going to have bigger eyes than the worker or the female bee. And that's that. Now, one thing that's interesting about bees is this trophallaxis. This is where we can call it an exchange of stomach content. So when the foragers come in, they, how do I put this? Trophallaxis is a very nice word of putting it, but they'll actually visit a bee inside the beehive, and that bee will extract, they exchange, I guess is a better word, stomach contents, and then those get put into either feeding the brood that's in the cells, or get stored as honey in the future. So if you have heard, honey is just eating bee vomit, or if you've ever seen some of those depictions, that's kind of what that's about. But we'll talk about honey here in a little bit and how it's a wonderful substance. The queen is usually, some beekeepers will actually mark the queen, or they'll get the queen in marked. And so this one's marked 34. It's kind of hard to see her in relation to the rest of the bees. But I wanted to pull this one out because, again, in here we've got some worker bees with their smaller eyes and some drones with their big eyes. And then they also are a little bit more girthy around their abdomen than the worker bees. But again, inside a hive where you have a ton of action happening, it's really hard to tell who's who when there's just bees all over the place. And the more you look and the more experience you get, the easier it is to tell. And this is another one. This is a little bit better depiction of the queen, what she looks like, her elongated kind of peanut-shaped tan body as compared to the other, or her tan abdomen as compared to the other honeybees. And she emits pheromones. Pheromones are kind of it's an odor. I try and collect swarms, and one odor that we put in these swarm boxes to attract these new hives is lemongrass oil. And lemongrass kind of is how the queen, kind of an odor that the queens emit. So that is, if you want to think of what that odor is, kind of think in the lemongrass oil area. And so these pheromones are actually what help keep the hive going. So they really help the worker bees know that there's a queen there, that their queen hasn't died or something hasn't happened to their queen. And they also help in regulating the hive's temperament. If you have a hive that has a really aggressive temperament, you can look at requeening it with a more domesticated queen, a fresh queen that's more, genetically speaking, more in line with the European honeybees. So they really help with the temperament of the hive. So a lot of times beekeepers, after, they want you to, it's the goal to requeen your hive every year, but when a hive becomes kind of ill-tempered or the queen starts to fail, requeen it with a new queen, and that'll help calm the hive down. The queen also, if there are too many bees in the hive, the queen's pheromones are not able to be emitted throughout the entire hive. And so that's an indication to the worker bees that there are too many bees in the hive and new queen cells need to be made and the hive needs to split. It's a natural process, and that's where we get these swarms where bees will kind of leave, half of the bees will leave the hive, a little bit more than half, and look for a new home elsewhere. So during the springtime when the nectar is flowing and a lot of things are blooming, this also happens sometimes in the fall because we have a really good fall wildflower bloom here in Central Texas. But when things are really in their prime and the hive's really producing, you'll get a lot of compaction of bees in the hive, and unless we're adding box upon box upon box and giving them enough room, they'll start to get congested and they can't sense that pheromone as well, and the workers will make new queen cells, and those queen cells, it's survival of the fittest, we'll look at that here in a little bit, or survival of the one that gets out the quickest, but that queen will take about 60% of the hive and leave and find a new home elsewhere. So that's one of the important things about the queen, is that she really regulates, her pheromones really regulate the hive. Very important. And so I'm pulling these out, but keep in mind that on each of these would be honeycomb, and it would be full of bees, either brood or combination of honey and pollen and brood, or we'll talk about honey here in a little bit, but honey, if you know you're trying to target honey production. So I mentioned that the workers kind of help determine if queen cells need to be laid. So if the workers are not getting their queen pheromone and they're not getting the appropriate amount that they need, either the queen has failed or is failing, or the hive is congested and they need to split off. And the queen starts out as just an egg that's laid in a queen cell. Queen cells are a little bit different than a regular cell, and I can show you guys here in a little bit the difference. But the only difference, what makes that larvae turn into a queen, is royal jelly. And so she's fed royal jelly, and it's just a diet. It's just a difference in diet. And so if you go to some of these health food stores, you can actually buy royal jelly. It's a really great substance, loaded, full of nutrients, all sorts of good stuff. But the royal jelly is the key to the colony's development. So it's secreted with pre-digested pollen that comes from the young nurse bees, from their pharyngeal glands. It is an exceptional food that provides for the bees' larvae growth. The growth is unequal to anything in the animal world, which is why those queens pop out sooner. They have just a 16-day process because they're growing rapidly. They're the biggest bee, so it's a really great substance to help meet that demand. And it really contributes to a gestation period that's 16 days instead of 21. And it really, like I mentioned before, they're the biggest bees, the queen bees are. So it's really great stuff. So this is a really great depiction of what we look for on a frame. When we pull a frame out, we want to see larvae here. We want to see in some of these eggs where you can't really see much happening, there might actually be little bitty eggs that are in there. Those are usually harder for the beekeeper to see. It's one of those things where you wind up getting the hang of it with experience the longer you're a beekeeper for. But up here, this is where, so on a normal bee frame, you've got brood down kind of in this section, and in this section you've got capped honey, and then sometimes you'll see a layer of pollen as well. And so the bees, really their pollen is their protein source, and then their nectar, or the honey, the nectar gets converted into honey. That's their carbohydrate, their sugar source. So they really need both of that. It's not just about the nectar, it's also about the pollen. And likewise, it's not just about the pollen, it's also about the nectar. So both of those are critically important to the development of the honeybee. All right, we're going to switch gears and go over here and look at, I wanted to show you guys the queen cell. So the queen cell, this is also another example of the queen cell. It just kind of hangs off of, kind of hangs down rather than being off of the frame. It hangs down. And let's go over here while we're on the subject and take a look at our live honeybees. So I pulled these frames last night from a big box like we were just in, and these are just our regular cells. If you see the black underneath here, I actually start off with kind of a foundation that's coated in wax to kind of help them jumpstart rather than not giving them anything. And they build wax cells off of that foundation, and then they store nectar in these. These are taken only from a honey box, and we'll go over that a little bit more here in a second, but these are only taken from a honey box, so there's no brood in here, there are no bee babies in here. This frame is not capped honey, so it still needs, you can kind of see it's glistening, kind of that really glistening substance. So that's nectar that is going to be converted into honey, and part of that process involves ventilation and getting the excess moisture off. They know somehow what moisture content is in there, and when they get it just right, about 17 to 18% moisture, they'll actually cap it, and when it's capped, that honey is good to go for a while, for a long time. It's actually perfectly good to store it like that. I have kept frames in the hive like this over a season or two, just to get them, if they needed extra, get them through winter or get them through summer. So this capped honey is perfect moisture content, and it's ready to go. So when the beekeeper is pulling honey frames out of their honey box and they see this will be good for harvesting. This we typically wait a little bit longer on. Still has more work to do. And all these bees that you see in here, these, I was looking last night, they're all worker bees. These frames came out of a box that has a queen excluder. I'll show you guys here in a second. So there are no queens that are in here, and no drones, because the drones tend to be a little bit too chunky really to kind of get through that queen excluder for the most part. All right. So we talked a little bit about age polytheism, which is, I think, one of the coolest things about honeybees is the age polytheism. Now I want to go over some really neat aspects of the honeybee, just kind of the fun facts. Honeybees have 5 eyes, and their eyes are a combination of simple and compound eyes. So in the compound eyes, as the name suggests, there are a lot of lenses within that eye. And those eyes are able to, a lot of our facial recognition technology is based on how bees see. So and I've noticed this as a beekeeper, and I'll be curious to see if other beekeepers have noticed this as well, is the bees kind of develop an ability to recognize you if you are frequenting the hive. And so they see not necessarily your face, but the features on your face. They're able to make a pixelated, almost topographic map of your face. And I think it's really cool that a lot of our facial recognition technology comes from how the honeybees see. They also use polarized light, and they use this as their GPS signal. So even on a cloudy day, there is some polarization that is able to take place, and they're really able to take this information and hone in on where their hive is and where they need to go home, which is really, really neat. The other neat thing about honeybees is that we look at a flower and we see, like the sunflower over here, we actually see our eyes, we see the ray flowers, which are yellow, and then there's this different hue that's kind of orange at the base of these ray flowers, and then we see the disc flowers. But what a honeybee actually sees are what are called UV nectar glides, and it's amazing if you look it up on the internet. Some of the common flowers that we see actually look completely different to a honeybee because they're kind of seeing in UV. And the flower is just kind of telling the honeybee, go here. This is where you need to land. This is where you need to go. And it's really, really neat to look at the different types of flowers and see. And so one common one, I don't know if you can zoom in on this, is this flower here. So this is what we see. And in the same flower, this is what the honeybee sees. And these right here are the nectar glides. And so we can't visibly see that, but the honeybee actually can. And that is, to me, just the coolest thing. So there's a whole other world out there that we can't see that other creatures can. And it's kind of a subtle communication system between the flower and the honeybee. Let them know exactly where to land, exactly where to go. And so, as mentioned before, they see a lower range of the UV spectrum, and excuse me, and so they're actually able to see different than we are. This is another picture that I want to show you guys. This is kind of our common, what we call buttercup. This is what we see on y'all's left, and then this is what the honeybee actually sees. And again, those UV nectar guides are kind of what guide those honeybees where they need to go. Another cool aspect about the honeybees is their communication system. So they have, many of you may have heard this, they have a dancing system where they can communicate with each other. And so the different types of dances show different things. So we've got the round dance down here. This is the round dance. And then we've got the waggle dance over here. And then we have a shiver dance. So the waggle dance, it's not just the dance, the fact that they're dancing, that communicates the where the food source is. It's also the duration of their dance on these long, because they'll kind of, it's almost like a figure eight. They'll come around, and it's the duration of this waggle that tells them how far the food source is, and it's also the angle sitting on the bee frame, the angle to which they're doing the dance. So if they're doing the dance like this instead of like this, that tells them where the nectar source is. And so that's a really important way for them to communicate. They also do the round dance, and they'll do this if the nectar source is pretty close. They'll do this instead of the waggle dance, and again, it's kind of the actual direction of where they waggle, and there's some great videos on this as well. And the shiver dance is one that tells the other bees about a good place to build a nest. And this is really important when they're swarming, when the hive is splitting. They're very selective about where they want. They'll actually send out scout bees. We'll talk about this I'll talk a little bit more about swarming, but they'll actually send out scout bees. And so this is a form of communication when those scout bees come back and kind of convey a signal to the rest of the swarm on where to go. And it's the quality of the dance that shows how good the nest site is. That's a really cool aspect of the bee.
So we have a couple questions.
Sure.
Mary Mullins Branson asks, where can we find this book?
This book?
Mm-hmm.
So we got this book at Half Price Book a while back. I'm going to show the cover so you can take down the information. It's a really nice book. It's the Beautiful Bee, the Beautiful Bee book, and then down here is the information that you would need. It is a really great book. Really great book. And we'll go over a few other things in here that really show some cool aspects of the bee, but I really recommend this book.
And then Pamela Wilson says, there are honeybees drowning in my bird bath every day.
Yes.
What can I do to prevent this?
So that's a great question. So the bees, as mentioned before, they need water. And so the foragers, they're picking up water, they're picking up nectar, pollen. There's a whole list of things that they pick up. But one important source right now is water. And again, it's to help with the regulation of the hive, and then also with the brood and everything else. So I really recommend folks who are having the honeybees in their bird bath or anywhere else kind of hitting water sources to create, and I know this it may seem a little bit difficult, but to create some shallow areas for them. I have right now one of those poultry water feeders for chickens, and then at the bottom you can put rocks, you can put twigs, probably maybe on one half of your bird water bath. You can try this. The birds may actually like this as well. Just a place for them to kind of work their way out a little bit easier. But they're in there trying to get water. I've seen them at the gym I work out at. They're actually trying to get water from the pools, water even from the hot tub that's outside that's going. I can't imagine trying to use a hot tub right now. But right now they're really hot. They're kind of cranky. And so they're really looking for that water to help with the thermal regulation of their hive, trying to keep it cool.
And then Gilbert Guzman Jr. asks, how can I start a bee box?
So that is something we were going to talk about at the end, but since it's already brought up, I'll go ahead and kind of mention my journey. And I think that this is important for anyone who, like Gilbert, wants to start a hive, as I always thought I wanted to have a beehive for honey, and I didn't know if I could handle it, and I've never really been scared of bees, but I took a course, and I think that's the best way to start. A lot of these courses, the one I took was Beekeeping Basics with Molly Keck, some 7 years ago, I think I may have taken it back in 2013. She offers them, I think, at least twice a year. That is so important because it gives you kind of a day of foundation work of what you need to get started, where you can buy it from, kind of the bare bones of what you need to get started. But then the second day, and she may have things set up a little bit differently now, the second day you're actually out in the field and you're working in a bee suit, and you're hot, and you're working with cranky bees because they're hot and cranky, and you really get the feel for, am I going to be scared? Can I really hack this? Can I not hack it? And that is a really great start. So before you go out and just kind of buy bees and buy the setup, I really would recommend actually going that route to make sure you're good to go, because there are the bee havers and the beekeepers. And I personally believe, and a lot of people will disagree with me, that there's nothing wrong really between the two. But you do need to be able to get into your hive at least a few times a year. Even if you want to be a bee haver and not a beekeeper, you still need to get into your hive a couple times a year and do maintenance. We're going to talk a little bit about kind of some of the challenges with being a beekeeper, and it's really hard just to set up a hive and put bees in it, buy bees and put them in there and walk away. I don't recommend that. So if you definitely want to be a bee haver, you still need to have some degree of beekeeping, where you're actually kind of the husbandry part of it, where you're actually looking at the bees a couple times a year and doing what they need. There's a lot of pests out there, and you would wind up losing your bees, and it's never fun. It's happened to me quite a few times. So hopefully that answers your question. There are different companies out there that I've bought bees from. I've bought bees from every single local company, I think, in Texas. And really, I can't recommend one over the other because it's what works for you. And every person and every site's different. And that's kind of why I branched out to different companies and bought bees and bought queens from different companies, is because I'm trying to get that feel of what stock out there and what company works best for my needs. Where I have bees at 2 different properties, and they're both completely different sites, and they're only 20 miles away from each other. Again, there are great companies out there that you can actually buy your boxes from. They sell your boxes, they sell you boxes, and then they also sell you bees. There are different types of there's different ways to buy bees. You can either buy a bee bus, and that comes with a queen and about 10,000 bees, and you can just put the bee bus, install it into your hive, or you can buy actually what's called a nuke, and that's like a mini hive. Those are more expensive, but they're a little bit more stable in that you get frames of brood. You actually, instead of getting bees, you actually get frames of brood and frames of honey and pollen to kind of go with that brood, as well as the queen. So hopefully that answers that. All right. Another fun fact about bees is that they actually sleep. Bees sleep between 5 to 8 hours at night, of course, because when the sun comes up, they have their duties. They have to go out and work or stay in the hive and work. The bees that I pulled here yesterday, I pulled them around 5 o'clock yesterday. They were very unhappy. They were very hot, and brought them inside in the AC, and they were just the sound that they were making. There was probably a couple hundred bees in that observation hive, but they just all evening, and finally around, I guess, 9 or 10 o'clock they stopped. And so they really kind of decided, okay, I can only protest so much, I need some sleep now. And they actually found, scientists actually found that sleep is really important for bees, because a lot of it's about the dance, right? So a bee goes out and finds like this beautiful butterfly learning center, for example, where there's a lot of plants that are blooming. So it's a good pollinator habitat. So they say that bees find this habitat, and it's the bee's knees, so to speak. And so they go and they tell the rest of their hive, the rest of the foragers, where to go. That's really important. That dance is really important because they have to get things precise. They have to get their dance precise. And the scientists have found that when bees don't get their sleep, they're kind of what they refer to them as sloppy dancers. They don't convey the message well at all. And the rest of the hive, okay, we don't exactly know where to go. We know it's kind of in this general location. We didn't get good information from the one who came back to tell us where this great butterfly learning center is, for example. So the dance is important, and the dance only goes as good as the bee who gets the rest. And so they actually sleep, which is really cool. It helps with their memory, just like us, it helps with their memory. So let's go into some of the bee products. We actually have honey that the bees produce, and again, this is from the nectar that they bring in from flowers. And sometimes in hard times, for example, during the winter and during the summer months when there's nothing blooming, I'll actually feed my hives sugar water so they can get that nectar, that carbohydrate source from sugar water that's mixed appropriately for the time. And so that's basically where honey comes from. And then the sugar water or the nectar source actually helps them produce wax. And they will produce wax from it's the coolest process that I can hardly even begin to explain how and why, but they'll actually produce sheets of wax from their abdomen. And again, this is one of those age polytheism duties where it depends on their age. There go my posters. It depends on their age where they can actually produce the wax, but they'll just pull out sheets of wax from their abdomen and form it and then actually lay it down for the cells. And each cell is made perfectly. They're actually tilted a little bit. How they know the tilt and how they know how to make each one's perfectly is just beyond what I can possibly explain. They are wonderful architects and absolutely amazing. Pollen is really good for us. You can actually again go to health food stores and buy pollen, but it's their protein source, and it's actually kind of what some beekeepers refer to as the bee bread. So it's really important for their the development of the brood. They're actually fed that bee bread. Royal jelly, we talked about royal jelly, and again, that's kind of the substance that makes the queens. And then we have propolis. So propolis, let's see if I can find that one. Propolis to me is one of the coolest things. So in this picture, the bee has 2 balls of propolis on the back of its legs. Propolis is a sticky gum-like material that is very odoriferous. And in this area, a lot of the propolis is kind of tree resin. In the hill country, a lot of the tree resin is from the ash juniper or cedar trees, pine trees, stuff like that, if there are any pine trees. And they use this to fill the cracks of their hive. And I think I've scraped most of this off, but when the beekeeper actually tries to get into the hive, we have a hive tool that pops open that frame, that pops open that box and the frames as well, because everything's stuck together by this propolis. It's kind of a ooey gooey substance. But the best thing about this is that the bees use it to sanitize the wax, and it has great antifungal and antibacterial properties. So one of the coolest pictures I saw was an actual mouse that had gotten into a hive that was completely mummified and encased in this propolis. And so, you know, the bees presumably killed this mouse and then began to, because they couldn't haul it out, it was a little too big for the Grim Reapers to haul out of the hive, they just completely encased it in this propolis. And that's just to kind of keep it from making the hive yucky, because they are really, their focus is to try and keep the hive as hygienic and as clean as possible, because this is where they're raising babies, this is their home. So they couldn't take the mouse out, so they just killed it, mummified it, and it stayed there until the beekeeper found it and took a picture and pulled it out. So that's really cool. The honeybees have what's called a honey stomach, and again, they can take almost half their weight in nectar back to the hive. And so there are enzymes that are actually, that the bees have, that actually start pulling the water out. So as mentioned before, especially with the observation hive where we saw the uncapped nectar that is not yet honey, and then the capped nectar that is now honey, those bees are fanning out that excess moisture, and then also their enzymes are helping to pull out that excess moisture until they reach about 17 to 18% moisture content. And which is just amazing. And again, the honeybees, they suck the honey out, they suck the nectar out of the honey stomach. The house bees do. So the foragers kind of bring in the nectar. The house bees, through that Trophallaxis, suck that nectar out and then take it for processing in the cells. And again, those enzymes are actually working to also help pull that excess moisture out. And then they fan the water off until they get it exactly the way they want it. And I don't know, like, we actually have an instrument that helps us test the moisture content. It's very expensive and it's very technical. How the bees know that they have reached that magical percentage is beyond anything that I can possibly explain. It's unbelievable. So a lot of the products from the honeybees, they're actually, as mentioned before, the propolis, antibacterial, antifungal, the honey as well. You can actually go to the CVS pharmacy and buy Band-Aids with this honey in there from Africa that's supposed to help heal your wounds. I've heard of so many burn victims who have had just honey applied to their wounds, and it heals kind of old wives' tales of, you know, you get a cut, put some honey on it, and slap a Band-Aid on. There's reasons for that. It's antimicrobial, antibacterial, and antifungal. I did bring some of the actual honey from one of my hives. Not honey, sorry, beeswax from one of the hives, so you can actually see. And then it just has a wonderful smell. It's almost kind of like a smoky honey smell. The wax is produced by 10 to 16 day old bees from their wax gland, and they take the sugar and they convert it into wax. And as mentioned before, small flakes of wax come out in 8 tiny slits on the underside of the bee. So 8 tiny slits on the underside of the bee, and they kind of come out in sheets. And it takes about 6 to 8 pounds of sugar or nectar, whatever they're able to find, to make a pound of wax. So with a lot of beekeepers, if we're using, it's kind of a fine line. It's easier for beekeepers to harvest honey and use that than to try and harvest wax and use it for a lot of our lip balm and lotions and stuff that we make wax, or that are made out of wax, because it takes a lot more resources really to make this wax. So it's precious material. And so a lot of beekeepers don't like taking their wax and making candles and stuff out of it, because it's very precious material. So the magic temperature for a hive is between 93 to 96 degrees. During the winter, during this winter storm that we had in February, I actually lost a hive. I got every single blanket that I could possibly get to try and just put over the hive. But some of the weaker hives we did lose, only because in the wintertime the bees make a ball. And the older ones are usually, you know, on the outside of the ball. And if the hive isn't big and strong, you're going to wind up losing, depending on how cold it is, you're going to wind up losing a significant chunk of your hive, which is what happened to me with one of my weaker hives. So they get in this ball and they shiver, and that vibration helps keep the center of that ball warm. And they also kind of go into a diapause, like a little hibernation, where they can not draw as much, need for as much energy and as much heat, and so that temperature can drop a little bit. But really, during those cold winter months, they tend to be in a nice tight ball, where on those winter days where they're just shivering, trying to keep that temperature, the core of that ball, at that 93 to 96 degrees. And you can imagine how much resources it takes to do that, and energy it takes to do that. Pollen is their protein source, It's transported on their legs, which is why I mentioned it's the bee's knees in here at the Butterfly Learning Center, because this is where the pollen is transported. So they pack it in on their knees on these little bitty kind of scopa or corbicula, where they actually just kind of, there's lots of hairs where they actually just kind of pack it in. And right now, again, I love to watch the bees coming in and out of the hive, and they're bringing different color pollen in and out. Right now I'm seeing a lot of kind of creamy light colored pollen, and when I go out and look at bees foraging right now, the Cenisos or the Texas sages, they're blooming. Great pollinator plant. It blooms when not a lot of other stuff is blooming in the summertime, but they're packing that pollen in, and it's kind of that creamy color. So it's great to start to associate pollen color with different plants and see what your bees are bringing in. Last fall, the evergreen sumac and the frostweed were just blooming like crazy, and again, that was that kind of creamy color, and we actually had green ooze honey, almost like this light green ooze honey that was part of the fall nectar flow. So that was a lot of fun, and that was again where I had my bees, that was the only thing blooming, and so it was just kind of this really cool looking honey.
We're at a little over an hour.
So really quickly, I just wanted to, while we still have just a very little bit of time left, I wanted to go over some of the native bees. Native bees are just as important pollinators, so I don't want to not mention them at all. One of our important ones are the Mexican honey wasp. Those are really cool. They make the paper mache big basketball type nests in trees. They're really not aggressive. You have to go out of your way to get stung by them. I've known a few people who have done that. We've got a couple different hornets, like I think it's the bold-faced hornet. Right now you might be seeing the cicada killer. And as the name suggests, it kills cicadas. We also have the tarantula hawk, which a lot of people have seen right now, the tarantula wasp. So that's a really important one. Yellow jacket. So a lot of people, I mean, these I don't typically like because I have a not great reaction whenever I'm stung, but they're still important pollinators. So paper wasp. We all know about the mud dauber. So kind of a thin waistline. And then right now you'll probably see squash bees, leaf cutter bee, that's one of my favorite ones. Really cool markings on the abdomen that just kind of go across. And then skip over some of these because they're not too common. Right now in our newsletter for this spring, we did an article on the sweat bee. I love that one because it actually goes and it feeds off of your sweat, and so that's really cool. So if something's buzzing around you, trying to feed off of your sweat, is probably not a fly. Kind of look, they're kind of green metallic. So I'll go ahead and conclude here because I think we're reaching the maximum amount of time, but if you do have any questions, you all know where to find me. I work at Hardberger Park, and I'm the Nature Preserve Officer here, and you can probably find my information quite easily, or if you have any questions, you can work through the Conservancy to get to me as well. And if there's anything else, just let me know. Any other questions?
Doesn't look like there's any other questions.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate y'all joining me today for the exciting talk about the amazing honeybees.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. If you enjoyed presentations like today's, please consider supporting the Phil Hardberger Park Conservancy by donating $5 or $10 on our website. We would greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much and have a great weekend. Bye.